The Qur'an. It is one of the most influential books ever written, a sacred text that over 1 billion people live by.
It's a rule book about how to live one's life.
And yet it holds many mysteries.
It has the ability to provoke many meanings.
You have clearly text in which God talks about peace and mercy, etc. But you also have texts that deal with violence and warfare.
From the Quran's mystical origins in the Arabian desert.
He heard this voice, and the voice said, recite.
To its dire warnings of justice and retribution.
The Quran is not shy about explaining the explicit punishments that people will suffer in hellfire.
What is at the heart of this sacred book? What are the secrets of the Quran?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Listen to some of the most powerful words ever written.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
They are the words which drive one of the world's most venerable and also fastest growing religions.
مالك يوم الدين.
Echoed over 1400 years by billions of voices. They are the words of Islam's holy book, the Quran.
Muslims believe that the Quran is something that was revealed by God directly to the Prophet of Islam.
It's not merely what God inspired his prophet to say, or say a history of some important event. It is actually God's own message to the world.
Quran translates from Arabic as the recitation. The words are intended to be spoken aloud. In doing so, Muslims believe they communicate directly with God.
The Quran, in preserving God's speech, becomes essentially a part of God. And as such, the text itself, the physical words, the pages, and the book itself has this intrinsic sanctity, this intrinsic holiness to it.
Leafing through the text, one can instantly see similarities between the Quran and Jewish and Christian scripture. Each speaks of one eternal and omnipotent deity, and they each tell some of the same stories. But the Quran is also a book immersed in mystery. Its verses, considered to be some of the most beautiful Arabic ever written, are a labyrinth of language, more poetry than prose. And its layout defies easy understanding. Unlike the Bible, the Quran doesn't follow a chronological narrative. Its 114 chapters, or surahs, are organized mostly according to length, with the longest at the beginning and the shortest at the end.
There's this almost what we would describe in modern times as a kind of stream of consciousness style to it. There's a kind of mysteriousness. The curious reader in reading the text just is left wondering.
It doesn't tell, for example, the history of Muhammad. It doesn't even tell the history of the world. There is reference to the beginning of the world, to God's creation, but you won't find it in the beginning of the Quran. You'll find it somewhere in the middle.
Muslims don't regard the Quran as a story or a history. They believe it to be God's message to his created people and his guide to steer adherents along the right path.
It's a rule book about how to live one's life, about how to define one's morality, how to experience the world and the struggles and the conflicts that the world brings about.
Interpreting the Quran's meaning is not easy. There is no single governing religious body in Islam, no Vatican to tell believers how to navigate the complications of the text. Each person's understanding of the scripture is his own.
As a Muslim, you have to believe what the Quran says. Now, of course, the interpretation of what the Quran says could be different depending on who you listen to.
So what does the Quran really say? And what does it really mean? The infallible words of Allah that Muslims obey today were revealed at a specific point in history to a real person in an identified place. The traditional Muslim account of the Quran begins 1400 years ago on a barren stretch of the Arabian Peninsula. This remote land was the home of Bedouin desert nomads and also the base of some tribal settlements. It was an era that Muslims now refer to as Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance.
We might refer to Arabia as a backwater of civilization, compared to the great empires of Byzantium on the one side and the Sassanid Persian Empire on the other side.
In the middle of the desert, surrounded by mountains on all sides, was the town of Mecca, the social, economic, and religious center of Arabia. Mecca was the gathering place for many coexisting strands of religious thought. Some Arabs at the time had adopted the monotheistic beliefs of Judaism and Christianity, and the stories and doctrines of those faiths were well known throughout Arabia.
Pre-Islamic Mecca was a city that was teeming with Jews and with Christians. So there was this stew of various Christian thoughts and various Jewish thoughts.
However, the religious landscape of 6th century Arabia was dominated by a pantheon of gods and goddesses. Every year, pilgrims flocked to Mecca to pray at the Kaaba, a shrine that had evolved into the sacred center of worship for their myriad deities and idols.
They believed in the existence of God, but God was in a sense far too distant to be connected to the actual everyday activities of human beings. So these idols would be the intermediaries between them and God.
By the mid-6th century, 360 idols were housed in the Kaaba. The annual pilgrimage to the shrine bestowed huge economic benefits on the Quraysh, the tribe that controlled the sacred site.
And all of these guys who are coming through, they have to make some offering. They have to pay some kind of a tax. So it's a very lucrative business.
The Quraysh had amassed a great concentration of wealth. While the leaders grew rich, most people in Mecca lived in abject poverty.
There was a major problem with regard to issues of economic maldistribution of wealth or economic injustice, issues with regard to the rights of orphans, of women, of the poor.
Slavery was common in Mecca at that time, as it was in many parts of the world. Baby girls, considered of little value in a nomadic community, were sometimes buried at birth. This city was the world into which a child called Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born in the year 570 AD. He was of modest background, but would grow up to become the prophet